All right. So it looks like we're creeping up to 200 people connected. So I think that's probably critical mass to get this webinar started. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to EcoAct and CDP's annual webinar. We are thrilled today to be talking to you about the different evolutions of the CDP questionnaires this year. My name is Kai Larson. I'm head of marketing communications for EcoAct and for the net zero transformation practice at Atos here in Southern Europe, based in Paris. And I'm joined today by Guilherme Cassaro from CDP and my colleague Caoimhe Costigan, who is based in London, who is our CDP expert and specialist for Northern Europe. So thank you both for being here with us today. And we'll get to both of your slides in just a few minutes. I want to take the time to present today's agenda. So I will be doing a quick introduction to EcoAct for any of you who don't know who we are and what we do. Then I will hand over to Guilherme, who will talk about the questionnaire changes and everything you need to know about the various CDP questionnaires for 2023 disclosure. Then Caoimhe will take over and she'll explain how to maximize the benefits of CDP, what we do here at EcoAct in terms of helping our clients and our partners with their responses, and why CDP questionnaires are really important in the context of a wider and robust climate strategy. These presentations will be followed by about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A with our two experts here. So feel free to ask questions using the Q&A module in this Zoom session. We will get to as many as possible live, but please know that we will do a follow-up. We'll send around a follow-up to this event where we will do our best to respond to any questions that we didn't get to during the live session. So please do submit your questions. If we don't get to them today, we will get to them after this event. We will be sharing in our event follow-up a recording of the webinar, as well as a copy of the slides that were shared today. So no worries, we don't need to write down everything that you see. We will be sharing all the content probably early next week. And then with no further ado, let me talk to you a little bit about EcoAct, who we are and what we do. So EcoAct is an Atos company. We are part of the Atos group. We're an international climate consultancy and carbon offsetting project developer with offices across North America and Europe, as well as teams on the ground in Kenya to manage one of our projects. We've been a CDP partner since 2014, so we're proud to be a CDP Gold partner and to have been working with them for quite some time now. We support a lot of clients in their responses to CDP each year. This number is growing, which we're also very proud of. And even as the number of organizations, companies, et cetera, even as the number of organizations disclosing to CDP grows, we are still working with what we consider to be a significant percentage of companies that finish in the A-list. So last year we worked with 4% of companies on the A-list. And then on average, clients who work with us for multiple years on their CDP responses have improved their score in the last 2 years. So this is a service that we have been doing for over a decade. We're really proud of the work we do, and we know how important it is for organizations of all sizes across all sectors to disclose to CDP, and how important the role that CDP plays is in sort of the global context of the fight against climate change. And then from here, I'm going to hand over to Guilherme, who will tell you about all of the new changes and evolutions to the questionnaires for this coming year.
Thank you, Kai. Welcome, everyone. My name is Guilherme Cassaro. I'm an account manager at CDP, Reporter Services, and I'm here today to give you a high-level overview of the CDP questionnaire changes in 2023. In this presentation, we're going to give you an overview of the main changes of the CDP questionnaire, so it's not an exhaustive overview. At the end, you will have an idea of the scope of the changes for this year's disclosure and the main revisions and developments to look out for. Please note that we won't be covering scoring, as the 2023 scoring methodologies have not been published yet, but they will be made available by mid-March. So please watch out for that. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll start the presentation by giving a high-level overview of the structure of the climate change questionnaire and questionnaire changes. And then I will focus more specifically on a couple of key questions that have been introduced in the climate change questionnaire. Next slide. So this slide shows the questionnaire structure for 2023. There are 15 modules for all responders, including the sign-off module, and an additional 3 modules that are sector-specific. For companies responding to the request of a customer, there is also the further supply chain module. There's a full and a minimum version of the questionnaire. The minimum version is a subset of questions presented to small companies and first-time responders. Some of the modules contain sector-specific questions or data points, and the asterisks and shading in gray highlights those modules. Next slide. Revisions and new content are driving strategic priorities of the CDP mission, and these are the headline changes for 2023. There have been improvements made in governance and engagement to increase the focus on how companies are planning to transition to net zero emissions by 2050, on strategy, including new questions on sustainable taxonomy alignment, and we're going to get into that in more detail later. In the targets module, target questions have been updated to cover disclosure of targets for Scope 3 categories, and the new Science-Based Targets Initiative, Forest, Land, and Agriculture, also known as FLAG targets. Updates in the emission disclosure module now allow disclosure and restatement of Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions data from up to 5 reporting years. An update in the carbon pricing module has improved the data on how organizations are using internal carbon pricing and carbon credits. Additional metrics have been added on fossil fuel exploration and expansion and investment in low carbon R&D. Other updates include improved renewable energy sourcing options in the energy bundle and new questions on biodiversity sensitive areas in the biodiversity module. Next, please. The scope of changes for 2023 is that 79% of the questions remain unchanged or have only a minor change. 1 question from the core questionnaire and 2 sector-specific questions have been removed. There are 7 new questions in the core questionnaire and 5 new in the sector-specific questions. The total number of questions in the core questionnaire has increased by 6 to 136, but please note that no company will ever be presented with that many questions. Each company takes a customized route throughout the questionnaire, depending on the selections that they make. Next slide, please. For reference, I have listed here the key changes in the climate change questionnaire. We'll explore in more detail those highlighted in the new questions part of the slide, and the remaining changes consist of minor changes to improve existing questions, correct errors, or clarify any guidance. Next slide, please. So from 2023, CDP will focus on integrating sustainable finance taxonomy into its questionnaire and scoring, which helps them bring them to life in the real economy. In this sense, the module C3 now has 2 questions to allow reporting on alignment with sustainable finance taxonomies and 2 modified questions on low carbon transition plans. The reason CDP has included these new questions is that we're the only global environment disclosure system, and CDP plays a crucial role in accelerating the implementation of standards at scale, including sustainable finance taxonomies. As you know, sustainable finance taxonomies are being developed all around the world and will improve the way companies provide, companies, investors, and policy makers provide appropriate definitions for which economic activities can be considered environmentally sustainable. In this way, it should create security for investors, protect private investors from greenwashing, help companies to become more climate friendly, mitigate market fragmentation, and help shift investments where they're most needed. Questions C3.5 and 3.5a, which are the beginning of the questions within this new module, will only be scored at the disclosure level. Next slide, please. Here we can see in more detail the question C3.5, which has been revised to drive the new taxonomy questions at 3.5B and 3.5C. The question text has been revised to indicate if you identify the alignment of your spending and revenue with your climate transition plan or a sustainable finance taxonomy, or even both. As such, it is no longer only shown to organizations who have indicated they have a climate transition plan in place at C3.1. Next slide, please. New columns have been added in C3.5A to allow companies to report their alignment with their new climate transition plan or sustainable finance taxonomy. The companies disclosing alignment with a sustainable finance taxonomy will be asked to disclose the taxonomy and the objectives under which the information is being reported, or whether they are disclosing overall alignment. Next slide. I think yes. 3.5B and 3.5C are new questions that allow companies to report on sustainable finance taxonomy alignment, but they won't be scored this year. These new questions allow the companies to report the extent to which their spending and revenue is directed at or derived from activities defined as sustainable by a sustainable finance taxonomy, such as the EU taxonomy or the Asian taxonomy. Organizations may now report the numerical amount and percentage of their total turnover, CAPEX, and where applicable, OPEX in the reporting year, which in relation to a selected economic activity is either taxonomy aligned, which means meets the criteria prescribed under a sustainable finance taxonomy, and taxonomy eligible, but not aligned, which means that it does not meet the criteria prescribed under a sustainable finance taxonomy. Next slide, please. In C3.5, companies are allowed to offer any overarching contextual information that they were unable to report at activity level at C3.5B, such as underlying assumptions, financial accounting system, and whether they have verified their taxonomy alignment data. This aligns with the accompanying disclosures required under the EU Taxonomy Disclosure Delegated Acts. For more information about sustainable finance taxonomies, including the EU taxonomy, and for explanations of some of the key terms, please refer to the reporting guidance for these questions. There, you will also find links to CDP's policy brief, as well as other CDP external resources on the taxonomy. Next slide, please. Now on to the biodiversity section. In the biodiversity module, there are two new questions that have been added on activities in or near biodiversity sensitive areas, and one question on value chain impact that has been modified. Next slide. So first up is C15.3, which has been updated to request details of the dependencies of a company's value chain on biodiversity, in addition to impacts. This change has been made in alignment with the IUCN's guidelines for planning and monitoring corporate biodiversity performance, which recommends that companies understand both their impacts and their dependencies on biodiversity. New columns have also been added, asking for details of the tools and methods used to assess the impacts and dependencies of a company's value chain on biodiversity. Next slide. Two new biodiversity questions have been added to ask about an organization's activities in or near biodiversity sensitive areas. The best practice shows that having an awareness of the proximity of a company's activities to biodiversity sensitive areas demonstrates an understanding of the relationship between their activities and the areas, allowing companies to mitigate any potential negative impact that they may have on the environment. The first new question is the C15.4, which asks disclosures whether they have any activities located in or near biodiversity sensitive areas. And then you have a follow-up question, 15.4a, which requests further details of these activities, including mitigation measures that have been implemented. All these changes, they align with the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, indicator number 7, on activities negatively affecting biodiversity sensitive areas. Next slide, please. Now we move on to the water security questionnaire, and as per the previous presentation, I'll give you a high-level overview of the structure of the water security questionnaire and any questionnaire changes. And then we'll focus more on the new plastics module, which has been introduced to the questionnaire this year. So with the exception of the new plastics module, there has been no change in the structure of the water security questionnaire this year. So please remember that the plastics module is only exploratory and will not be scored in 2023. So the high-level overview of the questionnaire is that in total we have 11 modules plus a sign-off module, and that companies responding to a request from a CDP supply chain member will also need to fill out the additional supply chain module. The questionnaire starts with the current state of monitoring and water accounting metrics. It goes through to water-related impacts, risks, and opportunities for business. It then moves into water-related governance structure, business strategy, and targets. And then lastly, a few questions are made on verification and the new plastics module before sign-off. These questions aim to drive the integration of water security issues into core company governance and business strategy, so that the organizations can transition towards a water secure future and eliminate any negative impacts they have on water resources. Next slide, please. These are the headline changes for 2023, and as per the climate change questionnaire, all the revisions are made in order to drive strategic priorities of CDP's mission. The 5 main areas where the questionnaire content has been strengthened are: 1, driving action in the value chain. So the value chain engagement has been reworked, including a new question on assessing suppliers according to water impact and identifying suppliers with a substantive impact, and 2 new questions on setting and monitoring water-related requirements for suppliers. Second, water pollution and hazardous substances, addressing the use of hazardous substances and procedures in place for managing water pollutants. And number 3, transition metrics to encourage the transition to a water secure future. Data points on anticipated future trends for water use have been strengthened in the questionnaire. And then 4, targets, emphasizing the importance of targets relating to water withdrawals, water pollution, and water sanitation and hygiene. And last, the sector-specific content. So now we have the coal sector and agricultural commodities sector, which are presented with specific questions to their sectors. New slide, please. Looking at the scope of the changes from a quantitative perspective, 73% of the questions remain unchanged or only have a minor change. There's 1 core question which has been completely removed, and 2 core questions removed, and data points incorporated into other questions. There's 18 new questions, 9 for the whole water security questionnaire, and 9 specifically on plastics. In terms of sector-specific changes, as mentioned, there are 2 new sectors, the agricultural commodities sector and the coal sector. The types of question changes are shown by module in the chart on the right side of the slide, and the total number of questions has increased by 14, including the 9 new questions on plastics, bringing the total number of questions in the questionnaire to 85. Remember, not all companies will have to answer all the questions. Next slide, please. Yes. So let's have a look at the new plastics module. This is the new module within the water security questionnaire. It's only an introduction to the theme of plastics. It's the first time CDP is tackling this theme, so we expect to have a considerate evolution over the years on the topic. There's a total of 8 sections in the plastic module. Each of these only has 1 question, except for the last section, which has 2, for a total of 9 questions. The first 5 questions in this module are qualitative and will be presented to all companies responding to the water security questionnaire. The next 4 questions are only presented to companies with specific plastics production or use activities, and these questions include quantitative metrics. Companies will then be able to self-select if they have any plastics production or use in question W10.5. Next slide, please. Moving on to the forest questionnaire. Introducing the questionnaire structure. The questionnaire has 9 modules plus a sign-off and the supply chain module for those responding to the customer request. The journey through the questionnaire begins with requesting information about a company's dependence on forest commodities and the impact of this dependence on their business. It then asks about a company's procedures, risk assessments, and governance before moving on to emphasize some key concepts for managing deforestation risks, including traceability, certification, legal compliance, monitoring of suppliers, and supplier engagement. Next slide, please. The main content changes for 2023 have strengthened the questionnaire coverage of these 7 areas. First, new question and expanded data points on landscape approaches, including jurisdictional approaches, improved targets questions, new questions on DCF and non-DCF volumes, new question on risk assessment, several modified questions to enable reporting on embedded commodities, revised questions across the governance module, and new and expanded data points in supply chain engagement questions. Next slide, please. In the forest questionnaire, 73% of the questionnaire has remained unchanged or has had just a minor change. The forest questionnaire has 80 questions, so a rise of 2 questions from the previous year. And last but not least, I would like to bring you to the further resources section. So next slide, please, where you can find more detailed information on the questionnaire changes. So in the CDP guidance webpage, you will find our questionnaire changes documents, which contain a more specific overview on a question-by-question level of the changes to the questionnaires. Next slide, please. Just wanted to remind you that the questionnaires are assessed through this guidance webpage, along with other items listed, such as, for example, the reporting guidance, which should be used to ensure that the right information is provided for data users, so that data users have what they need to correctly interpret a company's disclosure, as well as ensuring data quality. The guidance helps to indicate to companies what actions and performances information will support the sustainability goals. The scoring methodology, which provides the transparency about what CDP considers to be both good reporting and good performance, as well as technical notes and technical feedback form. Next slide, please. Finally, just some dates to be aware of. The questionnaire and guidance are now live on the CDP website. The online response system for the questionnaire will be opening in April. The deadline for companies to submit their response in order to be eligible for scoring will be in July this year, and in March 2023, there will be a translation review for the questionnaires for those that need it. Thank you so much for your time. I hope I didn't go over time. And I pass it on to my colleague at EcoAct.
Thanks very much, Guilherme. Perfect timing. Take it away, Caoimhe.
Thank you very much. And thanks for joining us today. My name is Caoimhe Costigan, and I'm a consultant at EcoAct and also the technical lead for CDP EcoAct Northern Europe. I'll be spending the next 15 minutes or so going through how companies can maximize the benefits of CDP, moving from seeing it as a tick box exercise to really using it to develop and improve environmental and net zero strategies. And next slide, please. So what we're going to cover today is how responding to CDP benefits you, how CDP can be used as a tool for improving your climate change strategy roadmap, and how companies can use it to maximize the benefits for themselves as well. I'll also be presenting an anonymized example of a client who's been working with us for the last few years and how they've used CDP to drive their strategy. And then finally, I'll move beyond carbon and also look at the benefits of reporting to the water and forest questionnaires. Next slide, please. So there are several benefits for companies disclosing to CDP, from strengthening net zero and environmental strategies to improving investor relations and reducing disclosure burdens. So firstly, companies can proactively address investor queries and expectations by disclosing to CDP. There are increasing demands from investors, customers, and supply chains on the details of companies' sustainability strategies, their climate targets, and their value chain engagement, and so on. So this really allows companies to respond to these demands. Also, disclosing publicly and demonstrating commitment to tackling climate change, understanding risks and opportunities associated with that, and also having a strategy in place to reduce those emissions has obvious reputational benefits as well. And companies showing that they are improving year on year, which is reflected in their response and the score they achieve, that demonstrates that they're really committed to change. And we'd suggest that companies should be disclosing publicly as well, and that will maximize accountability and transparency. Secondly, CDP allows companies to disclose on a central platform. So it allows stakeholders to easily view responses. It also allows companies to amalgamate their responses and data, so potentially from different departments and regions into one coherent response, which therefore helps with investor questions and also annual reporting. So it can help with internal engagement and also support on an external engagement and help reduce disclosure burdens elsewhere, as a lot of the data and case studies should be housed within your CDP response. For example, CDP provides the mechanism for reporting in line with TCFD recommendations. So there are about 25 questions within CDP which align to TCFD. So by preparing for CDP, you're also preparing for TCFD. And CDP also has connections to other frameworks, including RE100, the SBTI, SEGs, and so on. And these frameworks are highlighted in the guidance document as well. Thirdly, it can help anticipate upcoming regulatory and policy changes. So it can provide insight into new criteria or disclosure requirements for the future. And this is what we've seen with the biodiversity module last year for the climate change response, and also the new plastics module for the water security questionnaire this year. So CDP is currently voluntary, but regulatory bodies and countries are becoming more active on this front, and disclosure is becoming more mandatory in a lot of jurisdictions over the next few years, which we see with the US SEC and then also the EU Sustainability Reporting Directive. So CDP can help reduce and prepare for these disclosure burdens in the future if companies start preparing now. It can also be used as a benchmarking tool to understand how your peers, suppliers, and customers are doing. So companies can leverage best practice within the industry, also engage with the wider industry and learn from them. And this drives innovation and continuous improvement as well. The CDP also introduced sector-specific questionnaires a few years ago, which allows for the standardizing of the questionnaires along industry lines. So you can compare like for like as companies are disclosing against criteria and indicators relevant to them. It also presents an opportunity to engage with stakeholders and get buy-in from senior leadership. It's very important, if not essential, for senior level buy-in to drive and have oversight of net zero strategies and also to secure the necessary resources to make them effective. So this demonstrates that companies are really serious about their sustainability strategies and they're willing to make the necessary changes from the top level. What we've also seen is an increased desire for leadership scores, so scores of A or A- from the board level and leadership teams within companies. And also it acts as a framework to help guide understanding amongst senior leadership and also incorporates sustainability into more longer term financial planning and risk management processes. Finally, it identifies strengths and gaps in your current reporting, in your current strategy, and allows you to plan for longer term horizons. So it's not simply a tick box exercise of making sure you answer all the questions. It can actually help guide companies' sustainability strategies by identifying the gaps and highlighting the risks and opportunities of current approaches. And we've seen that companies are using this, the criteria set out by CDP to frame their strategies, understand how to best engage with their value chain, develop robust governance mechanisms, and set targets that will help contribute to a low carbon and net zero future. Next slide, please. So CDP's core modules include key themes and criteria that are linked to best practice, net zero, and wider environmental strategies. Sustainability governance structures and governance mechanisms are an essential foundation for net zero strategies, and this allows companies to manage risks and opportunities through TCFD, for example, and also your climate scenario analysis, and also gain board level and senior buy-in and oversight of strategies to provide the leverage to see the strategies through. Companies should also be setting targets and reducing emissions in line with the 1.5 degree scenario, and also in the longer term reach net zero, as laid out by the Paris Agreement in 2015. And this sets clear and measurable goals and helps frame a company's ambitions. CDP have also expanded the target questionnaires this year to include the forest, land, and agriculture targets, or better known as FLAG targets. So companies in land-intensive sectors should be considering setting these FLAG targets in line with the new SBTi criteria. This is also a service that EcoAct now provides. So if you do have any questions on FLAG targets, you can get in contact with our team. And of course, measuring scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions acts as the basis for many of these improvement areas. So for example, you can't set a science-based target without understanding your value chain emissions, and you can't also begin to address those emission reduction initiatives without understanding your emissions hotspots. Additionally, verification of those emissions provides third-party assurance that what a company is reporting is correct, and it just provides that additional layer of transparency and accountability. Energy management systems are also important to understanding where you're consuming energy and potentially the cost savings involved with that. And carbon pricing and taxation are used to integrate carbon management decisions into your financial planning and decision making as well. Value chain and stakeholder engagement are becoming really important to climate strategies. As obviously many of you may know, usually most of a company's emissions fall within their value chain. So value chain engagement is a key part of a net zero strategy, and also a way of targeting those indirect emissions. And then finally, environmental stewardship is not only about carbon, although sometimes we can get quite caught up with all the focus on carbon, but instead companies should be focusing and taking a holistic view, ensuring wider ecosystem health and benefits to the planet through their water and forest strategies. And obviously the water and forest questionnaire can help with this. Next slide, please. So companies need to understand their gaps in order to improve. And EcoAct's approach involves the Edit, Evidence, and Evolve framework, which shows companies how to achieve improvements and identify gaps. So through this, we can help our clients identify the questions where they can gain easy points on, questions where they need a bit more detail to maximize points, and questions and sections where they need further, more longer term improvement. And this allows companies to get into the detail of their score and prioritize improvement areas. So the way we go about it is we have this Edit, Evidence, and Evolve framework. Edit meaning that minimal changes are needed to a question. It means that the detail is there. It's just a matter of rewording or restructuring the answer. Evidence means additional data is needed to gain full points. So for example, it may include a company needing to provide company-specific case studies or provide quantitative figures and timeframes. So just a bit more detail there. And then Evolve means that companies need to transform their business by implementing new initiatives. So this is probably will take a more longer term approach and can't always be gained in the current reporting year. So for example, this can include measuring and verifying all your scope 3 emissions, setting targets, climate scenario analysis, or setting an internal carbon price. And what this approach helps do is it helps break down quite a long questionnaire into bite-sized chunks and helps clients communicate these gaps and improvement areas to their senior leadership teams. Identified gaps can be focused on throughout the year or past the reporting year if you need more transformative change to your business. So companies can set out a plan on how they tackle these areas, not only during the reporting period, but further along the line. And addressing these gaps not only improves your score, but also helps prepare organizations and helps them contribute to a net zero world. Next slide, please. So this is an example of an anonymous client that we've been working with for the past few years and how they have used CDP to drive their strategy. So they went from a B in 2020 to an A in 2022 from not submitting in 2019. And they did this by starting small, looking at data improvements, and then they progressed to look at climate-related risks and opportunities through TCFD and climate scenario analysis. So if we take TCFD, for example, so they're already doing TCFD, but CDP really helped them guide further analysis in the area, and then also highlighted the gaps where they're falling short, and that allowed them to then improve their TCFD response. Also, due to a scoring gap identified by CDP, the company updated their CSA modeling with a new focus on transition models. And they also gained external verification, as this was identified as a major gap to get to the leadership level. So what CDP helped them do is identify these material gaps, learn from peers, engage with key stakeholders, and thereby improve their strategy. It also allowed them to be future focused. So for example, they've been thinking about biodiversity and transition plans for a while, but CDP really pushed them in this direction with the new questionnaires, with the new questions in 2022, and helped prepare them for regulatory and policy changes that are upcoming. This also demonstrates the importance of companies setting transition plans, as recent CDP research indicates that fewer than 1 in 200 companies have credible climate plans. And then once they set the foundations, they were also able to then set a net zero target. And this really also pushed them to the score of A. So this shows that you don't have to do everything all at once, but you can build up solid foundations and work towards continuous improvement with the help of CDP. Next slide, please. So 2022 was a record-breaking year for disclosures, as you can see on the graph in the right, on the graph on the right. There are over 18,700 disclosures in 2022, and this was about a 42% increase from the previous year, and also a 233% increase since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. So this really shows the momentum that environmental disclosures are getting over the past few years. It's also important, as 2022 was the year the IPCC announced that it's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And the climate change questionnaire is where we see the most responses. However, that's not to discount the water and forest questionnaires, which are also growing rapidly. And the future of environmental reporting is broader than just climate change. So forest and water questionnaires will really help prepare companies for the kind of more demanding environmental closures that are to come. There are several reasons to start disclosing to the forest and water security questionnaires. Firstly, existing company water and forest strategies are less mature than their climate strategies. So responding to these questionnaires can help identify gaps and improvement areas. And responding can help understand and manage risks related to water scarcity and deforestation. So companies may find that risks for water and forests are aligned to their climate risks. So you can align your response and risk management processes for all three questionnaires. It also helps companies understand the materiality of these resources for their operations. So whether they have significant impact, whether there are risks associated with them as well. Also, as I mentioned, it'll show that if there are gaps in your strategy, it'll identify those. And it'll prepare you for policies that need to be set in the future. It also provides the ability to become leaders in these disclosures, as less companies are currently disclosing to these questionnaires. So this demonstrates a company's commitment to sustainable water and forest management practices. It also highlights the importance of these topics to investors, as well as the health of the planet, allowing companies to understand how they can build a water secure and deforestation free world. So the questionnaires allow companies to think more widely about how to restore ecosystem health. And then also another important point is CDP may move towards an integrated single questionnaire in the future. So it's beneficial for organizations to already be thinking about disclosing to water security and forests. And the water security and forest questionnaire follow a similar structure to the climate questionnaire, but they're slightly shorter. So it shouldn't double your workload in any sense. And then finally for me, CDP may add the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD, requirements to the responses in the future. So again, it's good practice for companies to start disclosing now, so they'll prepare for potential changes in the future. That's it for me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Caoimhe, for that overview. I think it's interesting to see CDP reflecting what we're seeing at EcoAct in the market, which is sort of an increased focus on planetary boundaries, not just greenhouse gas emissions. So it's good to see that, you know, responses to the forest and water questionnaires are increasing, that biodiversity is being included, because these are all challenges that we're going to have to face in our generation. So we have received a number of questions submitted over the course of the webinar. So again, please continue to submit your questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll do what we can. And then again, as a reminder, we will be following up this webinar with sharing the recording, sharing the slides that were presented, and also sharing the questions that were answered both during the webinar and then questions that we'll take the time to answer following this live presentation. So quick question that came up during your presentation, actually, Caoimhe, 3 questions were related to CSA, so climate scenario analysis. People wondering if you could explain quickly what it is, and then whether companies tend to do that exercise internally or whether they rely on external support.
Yeah, sure. So CSA stands for climate scenario analysis, and it can involve quantitative or qualitative scenario analysis. I'm no expert on it, so I don't want to say anything that's untrue, but CDP have guidance on different models and methods that they would consider good climate scenario analysis tools within their guidance. So I think that would be a good place to start looking as well. In terms of, you can do it internally, or you can get a consultant help with it as well to further develop it.
Yeah, thanks very much. It is part of the risk analysis and mapping and process that we do here at EcoAct when we work with our clients. We include climate scenario analysis as an important part of that process. So if you'd like to learn more, we do have a lot of information available on our website. Next question. So I think, Guilherme, you may have mentioned this at the beginning. It was an early question, but just to remind everyone, if you didn't mention it, when will the scoring guidance be released this year?
The million-dollar question. We don't have the exact external release date, but we expect sometime mid-March this year.
Okay, great. So soon, coming soon. Another question for you, Guilherme, in the context of the CDP questionnaires relating to biodiversity. So how does CDP define a biodiversity sensitive area? And then follow up to that, is the biodiversity model still explanatory, or will it be scored this year?
We'll start from the last one. So yes, the biodiversity module will remain exploratory this year. We want to gather as much information as possible. So we encourage companies to answer the questions. Don't be afraid, you won't lose criteria from answering them. and the data points gathered are really important in driving further insight on biodiversity for us. So please do respond to those questions. Sorry, can you repeat the first question?
Sure. The first part of the question was wondering how CDP defines a biodiversity sensitive area.
So CDP doesn't specifically define a biodiversity sensitive area, but we have a set of standards that we accept, and those are within the reporting guidance. You can refer to the reporting guidance, and we will and you will be able to see there which are the tools and methods that you can use to define the biodiversity sensitive areas.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question that I think is probably directed at you, Guilherme, but Caoimhe, if you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in. How would you differentiate or position CDP in comparison to an organization like EcoVadis?
I'm happy to take this one. I think that there's a big difference between CDP and organizations such as EcoVadis. First of all, the scope. I think CDP is a much more, it's been there, it's one of the starters of the whole ESG disclosure system. It's widely accepted. Our data points are used by several other standards. And I think we, in terms of the quality of assessment and the complexity of the data that we produce is way higher than what EcoVadis is able to produce. So it's a more complex process, but in the end, it really brings out the best information possible, and that's why we're the #1 trusted source of environmental information by the world's biggest investors.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that CDP is sort of the world's largest database of environmental and climate related data, and companies disclosing to CDP represent over half of, the capital in the world economy. So it's a very big deal, and very helpful database. There was another question around disclosures, so about the number of companies disclosing, and a couple other related questions. So over 18,000 organizations disclosed in 2022. This is a global figure, so not just in the UK. So the follow-up to that question was, do we have an idea of the number of organizations that could disclose but currently don't? I think the answer is probably hard to say, since any and all organizations can respond to CDP. Is that accurate, Caoimhe? I know that we work with all types of different organizations, but it's hard to estimate who should be responding but isn't.
Yeah, exactly. I think any company can respond if they wish to. I know that CDP did a bit of research and potentially published a report on non-disclosures and the amount of companies not disclosing. And I think there's quite a significant portion that are requested to respond but don't. So I think that's also kind of important to consider, and hopefully we'll see more responses in the next few years as well.
Hopefully the lines on that graph shared earlier will just continue to grow exponentially.
I just want to maybe to add on that. Sorry, just to add on that, we have the non-disclosure campaign at CDP, which was a huge success past year. So this is basically a campaign that we run with some of our investors, targeting those companies that didn't disclose in the previous years, basically asking them to start disclosing to CDP, and this has shown great results. So a company that is targeted by this campaign is 2.3 times more likely to respond to CDP the next year. So we are seeing increasing numbers, and we're definitely acting on it, but hard to predict how many are still to come. But we do expect significant growth this year again.
Thanks. A follow-up question, Guilherme, you might as well keep your mic open. Do you see any any sectoral differences in terms of CDP disclosure, sectors that respond more than others, generally speaking, or on specific questionnaires?
Difficult question. I don't have that data. Anything that I would say wouldn't be accurate, so I'd rather refrain from answering that one. Naturally, you do have sectors that are more taking more action than other sectors, but if I wouldn't have the data on which ranks first or second.
No, that's fine. It was
sorry, I can be of more
tricky
help on
question.
that one.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Sorry.
But again, for questions like this, if we don't have the answer immediately, we will take the time to look into it and then respond in sort of our CDP FAQ document that we'll put together next week and circulate. Question potentially for you, Caoimhe, since it is related to EcoAct, wondering what kind of support EcoAct can provide for SMEs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we provide a range of services, not only with CDP, but related to CDP. We have a specific approach. I touched on it slightly in the presentation. It's the edit, evidence, and evolve framework that we use. And we tend to bring companies through that process. We score their responses, and we also provide drafting services and data collection services as well. And then we can also help with ways to improve your CDP score more longer term. So that's emissions calculations, verification, strategy support as well. So there's a range of ways we can help you with that.
Another question for
Can
you,
I just,
Caoimhe. Oh, sure, go ahead.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add on that from experience, what I see is that companies that are starting to report to CDP have a higher chance of struggling with answering the qualitative questions of the questionnaire. So definitely highly advise companies to seek help when answering the questionnaire for the first time. It can be burdensome if you are not prepared for it. So really make sure that you assess all the possibilities, may it be EcoAct, maybe it reporter services or any other options, but make sure that you're well prepared before disclosing to CDP.
Thanks very much. Just responding to a quick question regarding, is it also possible to have explanations in French? Oui, c'est non seulement possible, mais c'est prévu. So following this webinar, which is in English as a global language, we will be sharing a link to download our CDP fact sheet, which will be available in English, French, and Spanish. All of the content that we have around CDP is available in those 3 languages. For any Spanish speakers on this call, there will also be a Spanish language webinar that's being organized in a few weeks with our team based in Madrid and in Barcelona. So, generally speaking, whether it is live support from eco-actors, from our experts, or whether it is informative content or articles, updates on our website, what have you, almost everything is available in English, French, and Spanish. And CDP related, it will be shared with you following this event. So no worries there. We have questions about CDP potentially becoming mandatory. So before maybe handing over to you, Guilherme, my understanding is that CDP is voluntary and will remain voluntary. However, more and more legislation on sort of local levels, international levels that, required reporting frameworks are aligning to CDP. Would you say that's accurate?
Perfect. Yeah, so CDP is and will remain voluntary, but as you rightly said, many policies around the world are being developed around CDP. So CDP is the best practice in terms of environmental reporting, and we strive to remain the #1 for the next years as well. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question coming in about engaging with suppliers. So perhaps Caoimhe, but Guilherme, if you have any thoughts obviously feel free to jump in. So the question is, when engaging with our suppliers, should we ask for CDP disclosures and or their carbon footprint? You know, how does that tie into CDP disclosure working with your supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's definitely good practice. There's a section on engagement with stakeholders and supply chain within CDP, and one of the criteria is whether you have engagement with your suppliers and you include that in contracts you have with them. And I believe if you want to score at like leadership level, they're looking for those kind of requirements as well. So definitely ties in with CDP, and it is best practice.
Anything to add, Guilherme, or just agreement?
Absolutely, I think it's correct, and just an addition that CDP has a service called CDP Supply Chain, which helps companies request their information from their suppliers. So if you're interested in hearing more, feel free to access the CDP website or contact me either by email, guilherme.cassaro@cdp.net, and we're happy to refer to that service.
Perfect, thank you. So we have time for maybe one more question. We've got a few minutes left. So definitely for you, Guilherme, and it's potentially a tricky question, but there have been a number of questions related to the difficulties experienced with disclosure last year around sort of the platform crash and other issues, and people looking to be reassured that they will not run into the same issues again this year. Could you speak to that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, apologies for any problems that you have faced last year. We constantly strive to better our ORS, or online response system. As a matter of fact, CDP is undertaking a major revamp of the whole online response system in a partnership with BCG. So in the coming years, there will be a new platform to disclose to CDP, which will reflect sort of the latest available technology. But until then, not only we are developing this new platform, as we are also working on strengthening our systems, and we don't expect to have any problems this year.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's important to keep in mind that, you know, as the numbers show, organizations responding to CDP is growing exponentially, which means it's that much more data and website traffic and, you know, requests, potential issues to manage. So I know that last CDP season was a little bit tricky for for some of us, but you know, we have full confidence that CDP will continue to improve their systems. And of course, at EcoAct, we're happy to work with you to help work through some of these issues as we go through the reporting season this year. All right, so some questions are still coming in, but I am conscious of time. So I think we will wrap up here. So again, Guilherme and Caoimhe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak today on our webinar. We had a lot of people connected in, so good news all around. And for all of you still listening, I hope this was helpful. Again, we will be sharing the recording, the slides, the questions and answers, as well as a link to access EcoAct's fact sheet on CDP in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. And please feel free to reach out directly to us, whether via our website or directly to Caoimhe for questions around how EcoAct can support you, or feel free to reach out to Guilherme for CDP reporting services if you have any further specific questions. So thank you all for connecting in, and I hope whatever time of day it is for you in your time zone, you will have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Take care.